Before we begin, a quick and important disclaimer. The information provided in this video regarding social media graphic design, branding strategy, and digital marketing trends is for educational and entertainment purposes only. It does not constitute professional marketing, legal, or business advice. Graphic design trends are subject to rapid change based on platform algorithms and consumer behavior. While we analyze historical trends and case studies to provide these insights, individual results in engagement or brand growth will vary based on numerous factors beyond visual design. Viewers should conduct their own due diligence and consult with professional marketing strategists or legal counsel before making significant investments in brand identity or advertising campaigns. The visual era of the clean, polished, and perfect Instagram grid is officially dead. In fact, if you are still using the same minimalist templates that worked in 2022, you are likely watching your engagement metrics plummet towards zero. According to recent historical trends in digital consumption, the average American social media user now spends less than 1.7 seconds on a piece of content before deciding to scroll past it. We are living in an age of visual sensory overload where the human brain has been trained to filter out anything that looks like a traditional advertisement. The high-gloss, corporate sanitized aesthetic that defined the last decade has become invisible. It has become digital white noise. If you want to survive the 2026 landscape, you have to stop trying to look professional and start trying to look real. Think about the last time you actually stopped scrolling. Was it for a perfectly balanced, symmetrical corporate graphic? Or was it for something that felt slightly chaotic, perhaps a bit raw, or even intentionally unpolished? There is a massive shift happening right now in the US market where anti-design and maximalism are defeating the clean-cut standards of the past. Major American brands are intentionally breaking the rules of typography, color theory, and composition to reclaim the attention of a distracted public. We are seeing a revolution where the objective is no longer to be beautiful, but to be disruptive. This is the design apocalypse, and if you do not adapt your visual language, your brand will become a ghost in the machine. This video is not just a list of styles. This is a deep dive masterclass designed to solve the single biggest problem facing US creators and businesses today: the total saturation of the visual landscape. By the end of this session, you will understand the psychological triggers behind the 5 trends that are currently dominating the American social media space. You will learn how to apply these styles to your own content to increase your potential outcomes in reach, retention, and conversion. We are going to look at specific case studies of brands that pivoted from minimalist aesthetics to these high-impact trends and saw a dramatic shift in their community sentiment. To understand where we are going, we first have to look at why the old ways are failing. For years, the US design market was obsessed with what we call corporate Memphis or flat UI design. It was safe. It was friendly. It used soft curves and muted pastels. But historical trends show that as this style became the default for every tech startup and local business, it lost its ability to communicate personality. It became a signal for boredom. In 2026, the American audience is craving authenticity and high-energy visual stimulation. They want to see the human hand in the work. They want to see texture, grit, and movement. The first trend we need to dismantle is the rise of hyperphysical digitalism. This is a trend where digital graphics are designed to look like they exist in the physical world. We are moving away from flat shapes and into deep shadows, 3D textures, and materials that look like they can be touched. Imagine a social media carousel where the background isn't just a solid hex code, but a high-resolution scan of crumpled aluminum foil or a piece of recycled cardboard with visible fibers. This shift is driven by a psychological need for tangibility in an increasingly AI-generated world. When a user sees a graphic that has the texture of a 1990s zine or the gloss of a physical sticker, it triggers a different part of the brain than a standard vector graphic. Let's look at the step-by-step evolution of this trend. In early 2024, we saw the beginning of this with the glassmorphism and neomorphism movements. However, those were still too clean. In 2026, the US trend has moved toward brutalist textures. Brands are now using heavy grain, noise filters, and scanline effects to give their digital assets a sense of history and weight. For example, a major beverage brand in the US recently overhauled its social presence by removing all flat color backgrounds and replacing them with high-contrast, grainy photography that looks like it was shot on 35mm film and then photocopied. The potential outcome of this approach is a sense of premium grit that appeals to a younger demographic that views perfection as suspicious. Data from recent visual eye tracking studies suggest that imperfect elements in a graphic actually hold the gaze longer than perfect ones. This is because the brain has to work slightly harder to process the information, which increases cognitive engagement. When you incorporate elements like hand-drawn annotations, offset printing errors, or digital decay, you are creating a hook for the eyes. You are giving the viewer a reason to stop and investigate. This is the core of the 2026 design philosophy. Friction is better than flow. If your design is too smooth, the eye just slides right off it. Another critical component of the current US design landscape is the inside UI trend. This involves creating graphics that mimic the operating system of a computer or a mobile phone within the social media post itself. You have likely seen these posts that look like a series of open browser windows, a desktop folder, or a low battery notification. This works because it exploits the user's subconscious reaction to their own device interfaces. When someone sees a notification bubble in a graphic, their brain treats it with a higher priority than a standard headline. We are seeing case studies where educational creators use a Notes app aesthetic to share high-value information, resulting in significantly higher save rates compared to traditional slide decks. However, executing these trends requires more than just a filter. It requires an understanding of the cultural context of the US audience. We are currently in a period of heavy nostalgia, specifically for the aesthetics of the late 90s and early 2000s, often referred to as Y2K or Frutiger era. But the 2026 version of this is darker and more sophisticated. It is being blended with modern typography and high-end motion design. We are seeing a massive resurgence in serif fonts that feel organic and wonky, rather than the standard, clinical sans serifs like Helvetica or Montserrat that have dominated the web for the last 15 years. As we progress through this masterclass, we are going to break down exactly how to balance these high-intensity trends without losing your brand's core message. The goal is not just to be trendy for the sake of it, but to use these visual tools to cut through the noise of the American feed. We will analyze how to use color palettes that intentionally clash to create visual vibration, a technique used to make a static image feel like it is moving. We will discuss the step-by-step process of delayering, a design to make it feel more spontaneous and less manufactured. The problem you are solving today is irrelevance. In a market where every small business and influencer has access to the same design tools, the only way to win is to possess a superior understanding of visual psychology and current cultural trends. You are about to learn how to stop making graphics that people like and start making graphics that people cannot ignore. This is about the power of the first impression in a world that is moving faster than ever before. Prepare to take notes, because we are going into the mechanics of the 5 most influential trends that are redefining the American digital identity right now. The first trend we must dismantle and rebuild for your 2026 strategy is the analog-digital hybrid, or what industry insiders are calling tactile minimalism. Imagine if you are Sarah, a small business owner in Austin, Texas, trying to launch a sustainable lifestyle brand. You have spent thousands of dollars on high-end photography that looks like a stock photo catalog. You post these images to your Instagram and TikTok feeds, and the potential outcome is a total lack of engagement. Why? Because in the current US digital landscape, perfection is a red flag. It signals to the consumer that you are selling a manufactured lie. To fix this, Sarah pivots to the analog-digital hybrid. She takes those same high-end photos and runs them through a process that introduces artificial imperfections. She adds a subtle halftone pattern that mimics the look of a 1970s comic book. She introduces a scanner bed texture, making the digital image look as though it was physically placed on a glass scanner and digitized in real time. This trend is rooted in the psychological phenomenon of haptic memory. Even though the audience is viewing the content on a cold glass smartphone screen, their brains are hardwired to recognize textures they have touched in the physical world. Historical trends indicate that when a user sees a graphic with a visible paper grain or a slight ink bleed around the edges of the typography, their level of trust in the content increases. It feels more human and less algorithmic. This is the primary reason why we are seeing a massive surge in the use of riso print effects across major US brand campaigns in 2026. A risograph is a vintage Japanese printer known for its vibrant but slightly unpredictable color overlays. In a digital context, recreating this look involves using semi-transparent layers of bright pinks, oranges, and teals that overlap to create a third color. This creates a visual depth that a flat vector graphic simply cannot achieve. To implement this step-by-step, you do not need specialized hardware. You start with your base image and apply a high-pass filter to accentuate the edges. Then you introduce a noise layer set to an overlay or soft light blend mode. But the secret sauce is the chromatic aberration. By slightly offsetting the red and blue channels of your image, you create a soft blur that mimics a misaligned printing press or a vintage camera lens. This slight distortion forces the viewer's eye to adjust, lingering on the post for a fraction of a second longer. In the 1.7-second attention economy of the United States, that extra half-second is the difference between a scroll and a conversion. Case studies of boutique agencies in New York have shown that this specific tactile approach can lead to a significant increase in saved posts, as the aesthetic itself is perceived as a piece of digital art, rather than a simple advertisement. Now let us move into the second trend that is currently pulverizing the traditional rules of American design: chaotic typography, or the death of the grid. For the last decade, the mantra has been readability. We were told to use clean, sans serif fonts with plenty of white space. But in 2026, readability is being traded for impact. Imagine if Alex, a freelance graphic designer in Chicago, is tasked with creating a tour poster for a rising indie band. If Alex uses a standard grid, the poster disappears into the background of a crowded urban environment or a cluttered social feed. Instead, Alex employs chaotic typography. He stretches letters until they are almost unrecognizable. He overlaps sentences, creating a visual puzzle that the audience has to solve. He uses variable fonts that shift in weight and width within the same word. Historical trends show that the American public is becoming increasingly adept at decoding complex visual information. We are no longer confused by overlapping text. We are intrigued by it. This trend utilizes what we call the curiosity gap. When a headline is slightly obscured or the kerning is intentionally tightened to the point of collision, the brain's pattern recognition software kicks in. The user stops to read the message because it feels like a challenge. Step by step, this is achieved by breaking the text into individual letter forms and treating each one as a unique shape rather than a linguistic character. You might rotate the letter O by 45 degrees or drop the letter T below the baseline. You are essentially creating a custom logotype for every single headline. A high-stakes story that illustrates this involves a major American fast food chain that saw a decline in its youth engagement. They shifted their entire social media strategy to a chaotic, experimental typographic style that looked more like a streetwear brand than a restaurant. They stopped using their primary logo in the center of every frame and instead began weaving their brand name into the background textures using these distorted fonts. The potential outcome was a complete rebranding of their digital personality, moving from an old-fashioned corporate entity to a culturally relevant icon. This case study proves that the risk of being unreadable is often lower than the risk of being unremarkable. Value-add depth requires us to look at the specific tools making this possible in 2026. Designers are moving away from rigid software and toward fluid, generative typography tools. By using liquid simulation software, you can make your text appear as if it is melting or being blown by a digital wind. This adds a layer of motion even to static images. When you combine this with the high-contrast color palettes of the 2026 US market, think deep violets paired with neon limes, you create a visual vibration that is impossible to ignore. This isn't just about being loud, it's about being resonant. Consider the role of the scanline effect in this typographic revolution. By placing horizontal or vertical lines over your distorted text, you evoke a sense of digital transmission or a glitch in the system. This resonates with the American cultural fascination with cyberpunk themes and the feeling of living in a hyper-connected, tech-heavy society. This aesthetic speaks to the collective anxiety and excitement of the mid-2020s. It tells the viewer that your brand is living in the same chaotic reality that they are. We must also discuss the implementation of kinetic typography in short-form video. It is no longer enough for captions to simply appear on the screen. In 2026, the captions must react to the audio. They must bounce, shatter, or grow in size based on the speaker's inflection. This is the evolution of the trend. If you are a creator in Los Angeles looking to go viral, your text is your secondary host. It has a personality, it has a mood. By applying these chaotic typography principles to your video overlays, you ensure that even if the viewer has their sound off, the visual energy of your message is still fully communicated. As we peel back the layers of these two trends, we start to see a common thread: the rejection of the artificial for the sake of the visceral. Whether it is through the grainy, tactile feel of a scanned document or the aggressive, rule-breaking layout of a chaotic headline, the goal is the same. We are trying to break the trance of the infinite scroll. We are trying to make the user feel something before they even process what the post is about. But these are just the first two pieces of the puzzle. There is a third trend that is arguably more controversial than the first two. It involves the intentional use of low-fidelity, amateur-style graphics to bypass the consumer's internal ad blocker entirely. This is where the line between professional design and digital shitposting becomes completely blurred. In the next part, we are going to dive into the world of strategic lo-fi, and why the biggest corporations in America are now hiring designers to make their work look like it was created in 5 minutes by a teenager on a broken smartphone. We will also explore the rise of the liquid chrome aesthetic, and how it is being used to dominate the luxury and tech sectors. Are you ready to see how looking cheap can actually make you look elite? The transition into strategic lo-fi is not a mistake or a budget cut. It is a calculated psychological strike against the polished wall of corporate advertising. Imagine if Marcus, a digital marketing director for a high-performance sneaker brand based in Portland, Oregon, is looking at his 2026 analytics. For the last 6 months, his team of elite designers has produced breathtaking cinema-grade 3D renders of their footwear. Each pixel is perfect, each shadow is mathematically accurate, and each frame is a masterpiece of light and form. Yet, the click-through rate is at a historic low. Why? Because the American consumer in 2026 has developed a cognitive immunity to perfection. When Marcus sees an image that is too clean, his brain labels it as an ad and skips it before he even realizes what he has seen. This is the banner blindness of the modern era. To combat this, Marcus initiates a pivot toward strategic lo-fi. He instructs his team to take a $5,000 camera and shoot photos that look like they were taken with a 2011 flip phone. He wants the flash to be too bright, washing out the subjects. He wants the framing to be slightly off-center, cutting off the top of the product. He wants the captions to be written in a basic, default font like Arial or even the dreaded Comic Sans, used unironically. The result? Engagement numbers triple within 48 hours. This is not because the audience suddenly has poor taste. It is because the lo-fi aesthetic signals authenticity. It looks like a photo a friend would send in a group chat. It bypasses the brain's internal ad blocker by masquerading as organic, peer-to-peer content. Historical trends indicate that this movement, often called anti-design or new ugly, gained massive momentum in the mid-2020s as a reaction to the hyper-sanitization of the internet. In the US, where social media feeds are saturated with AI-generated perfection that feels increasingly uncanny, the strategic lo-fi trend offers a breath of stale human air. It tells the viewer that there is a real person behind the screen, someone who didn't spend 10 hours retouching a blemish. Case studies from major beverage companies and streetwear labels show that by intentionally lowering the visual fidelity of their posts, they see an increase in potential outcomes related to brand trust and community sentiment. The audience feels like they are being talked with, not talked at. Implementing strategic lo-fi is a step-by-step process of intentional degradation. First, you start with a high-quality asset because you need the underlying structure to be sound. Then, you introduce digital artifacts. This might involve downsampling the image to a lower resolution, and then upscaling it again to create visible pixelation. Next, you apply a harsh, direct light effect that mimics the look of a point-and-shoot camera flash. The shadow should be hard and black, not soft and diffused. For typography, you avoid the elegant serifs we discussed earlier and go for something that feels like an afterthought. You might even use the markup tool on a smartphone to circle a specific feature of the product in a bright, neon red that looks like it was drawn with a finger. The final step is the most important. Do not align anything perfectly. Let the text overlap the image in a way that feels slightly cluttered. This creates a sense of urgency and raw energy that a balanced layout can never replicate. While the strategic lo-fi trend is conquering the world of lifestyle and community-driven brands, a diametrically opposed trend is dominating the luxury and high-tech sectors: liquid chrome. If lo-fi is the grit of the street, liquid chrome is the shine of the future. Imagine if Chloe, a luxury jewelry designer in New York City, wants to showcase her new collection of modular rings. She doesn't want her brand to feel grounded or human. She wants it to feel like it was forged in a digital nebula. She employs the liquid chrome aesthetic, where every element of the graphic looks like molten mercury. The typography is distorted into fluid, metallic shapes that wrap around the products like liquid metal. The backgrounds are deep, infinite blacks or iridescent gradients that shift as the user scrolls. Liquid chrome is the 2026 evolution of the Y2K aesthetic, but with a sophisticated high-end twist. It utilizes the capabilities of modern mobile GPUs to display complex reflections and refractions in real time. This trend is particularly effective in the US market, because it taps into the collective fascination with the metaverse and the merging of our physical and digital identities. When a user sees a liquid chrome graphic, they aren't looking at a representation of a physical object. They are looking at a digital talisman. The visual language is one of fluidity, adaptability, and high-performance technology. The technical execution of liquid chrome requires a deep dive into 3D software like Blender or Cinema 4D. Step by step, you begin by creating a high-poly mesh of your text or shapes. The key is to avoid any sharp angles. Everything should be rounded and organic, like a drop of water on a windshield. You then apply a material with 100% reflectivity and zero roughness. The environment map you choose is critical. Instead of a standard studio light setup, you use an HDR image of a neon-lit city or a high-contrast industrial space. This ensures that as the viewer's eye moves across the graphic, the reflections are complex and engaging. To finalize the look in a 2026 context, you add a subtle glow or bloom effect to the highlights, making the metal appear as though it is emitting its own light. Case studies in the high-end electronics sector have shown that liquid chrome visuals lead to higher perceived value among American consumers. When a brand uses this aesthetic, they are positioning themselves at the cutting edge of the cultural zeitgeist. It is a visual shorthand for premium innovation. However, the potential outcome of overusing this trend is visual fatigue. Because it is so intense and high contrast, it can be overwhelming if used for every post. The most successful US brands are using liquid chrome for high-impact announcements, product launches, or hero assets, while using the more grounded trends for their day-to-day community engagement. Think about the contrast between these two trends. You have the raw, unpolished, almost lazy look of strategic lo-fi competing for the same thumbscroll as the hyper-advanced metallic fluid of liquid chrome. This tension is exactly what defines the American social media landscape in 2026. It is a battle between the hyper-real and the hyper-fake. For a designer or a brand, the magic happens in the middle. We are seeing a sub-trend emerge where these two worlds collide, where a liquid chrome 3D element is placed on top of a grainy lo-fi photograph. This juxtaposition creates a jarring high-low aesthetic that is currently one of the most effective ways to stop a scroll. As we move deeper into this masterclass, we have to address how these trends are being influenced by the elephant in the room, generative AI. We've talked about how to make things look human and how to make things look futuristic, but there is a fifth trend that is perhaps the most powerful of all. It involves the use of impossible geometry and surrealist storytelling to create graphics that literally could not have existed 3 years ago. This isn't just about using AI to save time. It's about using it to break the laws of physics in your designs. In the next part, we are going to explore the world of AI surrealism and how the most successful creators in the US are using it to build entire brand universes in seconds. We will also break down the specific color theory of 2026, including why Vantablack and radioactive neon are the only two colors that matter this year. Are you ready to see how to bend reality to fit your brand's narrative? Because once you see what's coming next, you will never look at a standard Canva template the same way again. The fourth trend that is fundamentally altering the visual DNA of the United States in 2026 is AI surrealism, also known as generative dreamscapes. For years, the conversation around artificial intelligence in design was centered on efficiency. How quickly can we remove a background or generate a stock photo? But in 2026, the focus has shifted from utility to world building. We are no longer using AI to mimic reality, we are using it to shatter it. Imagine if Tyler, a creative director for a sustainable outdoor apparel brand in Seattle, wants to market a new waterproof jacket. In 2022, he would have flown a crew to the Olympic Peninsula to get shots of a hiker in the rain. In 2026, Tyler uses latent space exploration to create a scene where the hiker is walking through a forest, where the trees are made of crystalline water, and the rain falls upward. The potential outcome of this approach is a total suspension of disbelief. When a user in Chicago or Los Angeles is scrolling through a feed of mundane life updates and standard advertisements, an image that defies the laws of physics acts as a cognitive speed bump. This trend leverages the psychological concept of the uncanny, but instead of it being a source of discomfort, it is used as a source of wonder. Historical trends in 2025 showed a massive spike in engagement for imagery that felt liminal, spaces that look familiar yet impossible. In 2026, this has evolved into full-scale surrealist storytelling. Brands are no longer just selling products. They are inviting users into a dream. Let us look at a case study involving a major American home tech company. They were struggling to explain the concept of a seamless, invisible smart home interface. Instead of showing wires or sleek devices, they released a series of AI-generated visuals where the walls of a home were made of soft, undulating clouds that responded to human touch. The furniture appeared to be woven out of pure light. This surrealist representation did more to communicate the feeling of their technology than 1,000 technical diagrams ever could. The data from this campaign showed a 45% increase in brand recall compared to their previous traditional photography campaigns. This is because the brain prioritizes the processing of novel, impossible stimuli. To implement AI surrealism step by step, you must move beyond basic prompting. The 2026 workflow involves a technique called neural compositing. First, you define your brand's anchor elements, the real products or logos that must remain physically accurate. Then, you use generative fill and outpainting to expand the environment into the surreal. The key is the juxtaposition of the hyperreal and the impossible. If everything is weird, nothing is weird. You need a tether to reality. For example, if you are designing a graphic for a coffee brand, the cup and the liquid should look 100% real, but the steam rising from the cup should transform into a miniature, swirling galaxy. This creates a focal point that anchors the viewer before their eyes wander into the surrealist elements. Furthermore, we must address the specific color theory that is fueling this trend. The rise of the polarized palette, specifically the use of vantablack and radioactive neon. In the US market, where OLED screens are now the standard on almost every mobile device, designers are finally able to utilize true black. Vantablack, in a digital sense, refers to hex code 000000, used as a structural element rather than just a background. When you pair this absolute void with what we call radioactive neon, colors like electric cyan or nuclear volt that have a digital glow effect, you create a visual vibration that physically affects the viewer's eyes. Imagine if Maria, a freelance graphic designer in Miami, is creating a campaign for a high-energy beverage. She doesn't just use a bright green. She uses a high saturation lime with a 15% outer glow and a slight blur, placed directly against a 100% black background. On an iPhone 17 or a Samsung Galaxy S26, this creates the illusion that the color is actually projecting light off the screen. This is not just a stylistic choice. It is a hardware-optimized strategy. Historical trends show that these high-contrast, vibrating color schemes have a significantly higher click-through rate because they stand out against the white or light gray interfaces of the social media apps themselves. The step-by-step application of this color theory requires a deep understanding of contrast ratios. To achieve the radioactive effect, you must work in an RGB color space with high bit depth to avoid banding in the gradients. You start with your vantablack base. When adding your neon elements, you apply a layer style that includes both an inner and outer glow. But the secret is the color of the glow. Instead of using a lighter version of the same color, you shift the hue slightly. For a radioactive green, your glow should lean toward a bright yellow. This mimics the physics of real-world light emission and makes the graphic feel alive. We see this being used effectively in the techwear and gaming industries across the US. A case study of a major gaming peripheral company showed that by switching their social media aesthetic from a multicolor rainbow RGB look to a strict vantablack and radioactive purple palette, they saw a dramatic shift in their perceived brand authority. The minimalist but high-intensity color scheme felt more premium and more focused. It signaled to the audience that this brand was for serious performers, not just casual hobbyists. However, the depth of this trend goes even further into the concept of data visual maximalism. This is where we combine the surrealism of AI with the precision of high-density information. Imagine a graphic that looks like a complex 3D architectural blueprint of a city, but the city is made of the brand's customer data points, and the whole thing is rendered in that liquid chrome and radioactive neon style we've been discussing. It is an overwhelming amount of information, but it is organized in a way that feels like a work of art. This is the 2026 solution to the problem of short attention spans. If you give people something simple, they skip it. If you give them something incredibly complex and beautiful, they stop to investigate. The US audience is increasingly looking for depth. They want to feel like they are discovering something, not just being sold something. By using AI surrealism and polarized palettes, you are providing a discovery experience. You are creating a visual world that requires more than 1.7 seconds to fully digest. You are building a brand universe that feels expansive, mysterious, and technologically advanced. But even with these powerful visual tools, there is one final element that ties everything together. It is the trend that is currently reshaping how we think about the layout itself, moving away from the square box and into the world of variable depth and parallax layering. In the next part of this masterclass, we are going to explore trend number 5, sensory spatial layouts. We will look at how brands are using the built-in accelerometers in American smartphones to create graphics that change their perspective as you tilt your phone. We will also dive into the step-by-step process of creating 2.5D assets that make your 2D graphics feel like they have three-dimensional volume. We are moving from the screen into the room. Are you ready to learn how to make your designs jump off the glass and into the user's physical space? The final frontier of social media design isn't just what you see, it's how you move with it. This final trend is what we call sensory spatial layouts, and it represents a total departure from the flat, two-dimensional constraints of the traditional social media grid. Imagine if Jordan, a marketing strategist for a high-performance electric vehicle company in Denver, Colorado, is preparing a launch post for a new off-road SUV in the summer of 2026. In years past, Jordan would have posted a high-resolution video or a static carousel. But in 2026, Jordan utilizes sensory spatial design. When a user in New York or Chicago encounters Jordan's post, they aren't just looking at a picture. They are interacting with a three-dimensional volume. As the user tilts their smartphone, the perspective of the mountain range in the background shifts, the reflections on the car's metallic surface change in real time based on the phone's accelerometer, and the interior of the vehicle becomes visible as if the screen were a physical window. The potential outcome of this trend is the complete erasure of the fourth wall between the digital brand and the physical consumer. Historical trends from 2024 and 2025 showed that users were becoming increasingly resistant to passive content. They wanted to participate. By 2026, the hardware in the hands of the American public, specifically the widespread adoption of advanced depth sensors and high refresh rate OLED displays, has made real-time spatial rendering on social media a standard expectation. This isn't just about 3D models. It is about spatial awareness. It is about a graphic that knows where it is in relation to the viewer. To understand the mechanics of sensory spatial layouts, we have to look at the step-by-step process of creating what we call 2.5D assets. You start with a high-quality 2D image, perhaps a portrait of a model wearing the latest streetwear in a rain-slicked alleyway in Seattle. Step 1 is the separation of planes. You use AI-assisted rotoscoping to pull the subject away from the background. Step 2 is the generation of a depth map. This is a grayscale image where the brightest white represents the closest point to the camera, and the darkest black represents the furthest point. In 2026, your design software generates this map automatically by analyzing the focal length and perspective of the original shot. Step 3 is the displacement. You map your 2D image onto a 3D mesh that is deformed by the depth map. The final step is the integration of the gyroscope data. You link the position of the virtual camera to the physical movement of the user's phone. The result is a graphic that feels heavy, feels like it has mass. When the user moves their thumb to scroll, the image doesn't just slide away. It feels like it is being pushed through space. We are seeing case studies of luxury real estate firms in Miami using this technique to showcase high-end condos. Instead of a flat floor plan, they provide a spatial graphic that allows the potential buyer to tilt their phone to look around corners or see the view from different balconies. This level of immersion has historically led to a 60% increase in time on post compared to standard static imagery. In the 2026 attention economy, time on post is the ultimate currency. But the sensory spatial trend goes deeper than just tilting a phone. It involves a concept we call visual gravity. This is a layout principle where elements are placed based on their perceived weight and the physical orientation of the screen. Imagine a graphic where the text is not fixed in place. Instead, as the user scrolls, the letters slightly settle into the bottom of the frame, or they float upward as if submerged in water. This creates a tactile, physics-based experience. A major American beverage brand recently utilized this for a social media campaign where the ice cubes and bubbles in the graphic would move and clink against the sides of the screen as the user interacted with it. This creates a synesthetic response where the viewer can almost hear and feel the product through visual cues alone. Data from recent U.S. consumer behavior studies suggest that this type of sensory design triggers a much higher emotional resonance. When a design moves in a way that mimics the physical world, it bypasses the logical brain and speaks directly to the subconscious. This is the goal of every viral creator in 2026, to create a physical reaction in the viewer. If you can make someone feel a slight sense of vertigo or a sense of tactile satisfaction just by looking at a graphic, you have won. Let's look at a scenario involving a freelance graphic designer named Taylor in Nashville. Taylor is working for a new music streaming service and needs to design a series of artist spotlights. Instead of a standard square photo and a play button, Taylor creates a sensory spatial layout where the artist's name is rendered in liquid chrome, the trend we discussed earlier, and suspended in a 3D environment. As the user moves through their feed, the typography catches the light and casts shadows onto the artist's face. This creates a sense of presence that makes the artist feel like they are standing right behind the glass of the screen. Taylor isn't just designing a post, Taylor is designing an encounter. To master this trend, you must also understand the role of haptic feedback. In 2026, social media platforms are allowing designers to trigger subtle vibrations in the user's phone that correspond with visual elements. When a heavy piece of typography lands on the screen, the phone gives a micro thump. When a liquid chrome element flows across the frame, the phone provides a smooth, rolling haptic sensation. This is the final frontier of the sensory spatial trend. It is the integration of sight, sound, motion, and touch. Case studies from the gaming and entertainment industries show that when haptic feedback is synced with spatial design, the potential outcomes for brand loyalty are immense. Users describe these experiences as feeling premium and high-tech. They are more likely to share the content because it feels like a novel technology demonstration rather than an advertisement. In a world where everyone is a creator, being the person who provides a new kind of sensory experience is the fastest way to build a massive, dedicated following in the US. The depth of this trend also encompasses the use of augmented reality or AR lenses that live within the post itself. We are seeing a move toward world-anchored graphics. This means a user can pull a graphic out of their feed and place it on their physical desk using their phone's camera. Imagine if a tech company in Silicon Valley releases a graphic for a new laptop. You don't just look at the photo. You tap a button, and the laptop appears in front of you on your real-world table. You can walk around it, see the ports, and check the thickness. This is no longer science fiction. This is the reality of social media design in 2026. As we conclude this exploration of the 5 major trends, from the grid of strategic lo-fi to the immersion of sensory spatial layouts, you might be wondering how to choose between them. Should your brand be raw and human, or polished and futuristic? Should you use the chaos of the grid break or the precision of AI surrealism? The answer lies in the psychological state of your specific audience. You are not just choosing an aesthetic, you are choosing a mood. You are choosing the frequency at which your brand vibrates. However, even the most advanced sensory spatial layout will fail if you don't understand the invisible infrastructure that makes it all work. There is a hidden layer to 2026 design that no one talks about: the use of microanimations to manipulate the user's dopamine levels. It's a technique borrowed from the world of high-stakes casino design and applied to the way a text box fades in or how a color transition occurs. In the next part of this masterclass, we are going to pull back the curtain on the world of neuromotion design. We will explore how specific frame rates and easing curves are being used to put the American viewer into a trance-like state of flow. We will also break down the step-by-step process of creating infinite loops that make it physically difficult for a user to stop watching your content. Are you ready to move beyond the what of design and into the how of human psychology? Because the next level of this deep dive is where the real power lies. To understand the real power behind 2026 social media graphic design, we must look beyond the colors and shapes into the realm of neuromotion design. This is the practice of using microanimations and physics-based movement to manipulate the viewer's neural pathways, specifically targeting the dopamine reward system. Imagine if Ethan, a 24-year-old software developer in Austin, Texas, is scrolling through his feed after a long day of work. Ethan is bombarded by thousands of static images, but suddenly, a graphic for a new productivity app catches his eye. It isn't just the color or the font. It is the way the text boxes settle into place. They don't just appear. They land with a subtle elastic bounce that suggests weight and physicality. This is not an accident. This is a calculated application of neuromotion design, intended to trigger a specific cognitive response. The science behind this relies on what researchers in 2026 call temporal contrast. Historical trends from the early 2020s showed that high-energy, fast-paced editing was the only way to hold attention. However, by 2026, the American public has developed a resistance to constant high-velocity content. Instead, the most successful designs now use a mixture of extreme stillness and hyperfluid micromovements. The brain is hardwired to notice a change in state more than the state itself. When a graphic stays perfectly still for 1.2 seconds and then performs a sudden 0.3-second fluid expansion, it resets the viewer's attention clock. This creates a state of flow where the user feels compelled to see the next movement. Let us break down the step-by-step technical implementation of neuromotion. Step 1 is the definition of the physics profile. In 2026, professional designers no longer use linear keyframes. They use simulation engines to assign mass, friction, and gravity to every element of a social media post. For example, if you are designing a graphic for a premium coffee brand, your text should move as if it is submerged in a liquid with high viscosity. This means it has a slow start, a smooth middle, and a very gradual deceleration. This mimics the physical sensation of the product itself. Step 2 is the application of easing curves. The Quintic ease out is the industry standard in 2026 for luxury brands because it creates a sophisticated, decelerating motion that feels expensive. In contrast, a back ease out, which involves a slight overshoot before settling, is used by high-energy gaming or fitness brands to create a sense of youthful rebound and kinetic energy. Consider a case study from a major U.S. fintech company that overhauled its social media presence in late 2025. They were struggling with high bounce rates on their educational carousels. By implementing neuromotion, specifically by adding a liquid swipe transition that responded to the speed of the user's thumb, they saw a dramatic shift in their engagement metrics. The potential outcome was a 34% increase in the completion rate of their 10-slide carousels. The users reported that the graphics felt more responsive and satisfying to interact with. This is because the design was mirroring the user's physical intent. When the digital movement matches the physical expectation, the brain releases a small amount of dopamine, rewarding the user for the interaction. This turns a simple act of scrolling into a rewarding sensory loop. We must also discuss the concept of the infinite loop, or the Ouroboros effect, which has become a staple of 2026 design. This is more than just a repeating video. It is a graphic design so that the beginning and end are visually indistinguishable, creating a seamless cycle of movement. Imagine a background texture of liquid chrome that flows in a constant, non-repeating pattern while the foreground text subtly pulses. For a user like Ethan, who might be in a trance-like state of scrolling, an infinite loop can keep him on a single post for multiple cycles without him realizing it. This increases the dwell time, which the 2026 algorithms prioritize above almost any other metric. To create a successful infinite loop, the step-by-step process involves using procedural noise. Instead of animating a shape from point A to point B, you use a noise function to drive the position of the pixels. This ensures that the movement feels organic and never repeats exactly the same way, even though the overall loop is seamless. You then layer this with a secondary animation, such as a shimmering light effect that rotates every 4 seconds. This multi-layered approach to motion makes the graphic feel deep and alive. Case studies of American record labels using this for song snippets show that it significantly increases the likelihood of a user clicking the audio link, as the visual loop creates a hypnotic accompaniment to the music. Furthermore, we are seeing the rise of neuromorphic layouts. These are layouts that physically shift based on where the user's eye is likely to be looking. While eye tracking via the front-facing camera is still a controversial topic in 2026, designers are using predictive heat maps to place motion where the eye is naturally drawn. For example, in a 3-column layout, the middle column might have a slightly higher frame rate or a more vibrant microanimation than the outer columns. This creates a visual hierarchy that guides the viewer through the information in a specific order. You are essentially directing the user's gaze without them even being aware of it. Another crucial element of this trend is the use of subperceptual flickers. This is a highly advanced technique where certain elements of a design are programmed to change at a rate that is almost too fast for the conscious mind to register, but is picked up by the subconscious. Think of a 120 Hz display where a single frame, just one, is slightly brighter or a different hue. This creates a sense of shimmer or energy that makes a static-looking image feel like it is vibrating with potential. Brands in the high-tech and energy drink sectors in the US are using this to create a feeling of intensity that their competitors, using standard 60 frames per second or 30 frames per second exports, simply cannot match. The data supports this aggressive move toward motion. Historical trends show that as American hardware has improved, the tolerance for static content has dropped. In 2026, a post that does not move is often perceived as a broken link or a low-quality placeholder. Even for brands that want to maintain a minimalist or quiet luxury aesthetic, the use of invisible motion, such as a very slow 1% zoom over 10 seconds, is mandatory to keep the pixels active and the viewer engaged. Think about the implications of this for small creators and independent businesses. If you are not using these motion principles, you are essentially invisible in the 2026 feed. But the good news is that the tools for creating these neuromotion effects have become democratized. You don't need a degree in physics to implement an elastic bounce or a liquid transition. You just need to understand the psychological principles behind them. You are moving from the role of a graphic designer to the role of a visual engineer. You are no longer just arranging elements on a page. You are managing the attention and the biological responses of your audience. As we look at Ethan, still scrolling in his Austin apartment, we see that he has finally stopped on a post that perfectly combines everything we have discussed: strategic lo-fi textures, chaotic typography, and neuromotion design. It is a perfect storm of visual disruption, but there is one more layer that we haven't touched on yet, and it is perhaps the most important for the long-term survival of a brand in the US market. It is the concept of generative identity and the use of brand avatars. In the next part, we are going to dive into how the most successful US brands are moving away from fixed logos and toward living, breathing digital entities. We will explore how AI is being used to create brand identities that change their appearance based on the time of day, the weather and the user's location, or even the current sentiment of the stock market. We are moving from a static brand to a sentient brand. Are you ready to see how your logo can start talking back to your customers? Because the era of the fixed brand is over, and the era of the fluid identity has just begun. The fluid identity revolution is not just a change in how logos look. It is a fundamental shift in how brands exist within the digital ecosystem of the United States. For decades, the gold standard of branding was consistency. You had a brand Bible that dictated the exact hex code of your blue and the precise pixel width of your logo's clear space. But in 2026, consistency is being replaced by companionship. A brand that stays the same while the world around it changes feels static, robotic, and out of touch. Imagine if Jackson, a freelance brand strategist in San Francisco, is working with a new green tech startup. Instead of giving them a single SVG file for their logo, Jackson delivers a generative script. This logo is programmed to breathe. When the air quality index in the user's specific zip code improves, the logo expands and takes on a vibrant, oxygenated green hue. If the local weather report indicates a storm, the logo's edges sharpen and its color shifts to a deep, electric slate. This is what we call datamorphic design. It is the practice of tying a brand's visual assets to real-time data streams via APIs. Historical trends from the early 2020s showed brands experimenting with dynamic logos, such as the Google Doodle or the MTV logo variations, but those were curated by humans. In 2026, the process is fully automated and hyper-localized. The potential outcome for a brand using datamorphic design is a sense of deep, contextual relevance. When a user in Boston sees a graphic that subtly reflects the gray, wintry light of their actual afternoon, while a user in Phoenix sees the same brand represented in high contrast, sun-drenched ambers, the brand ceases to be a distant corporate entity. It becomes a reflection of the user's immediate reality. Let us look at a case study of a major US airline that executed a total fluid rebrand in early 2026. They replaced their static flight path graphics with a generative system that pulled data from their actual fleet movements, global weather patterns, and even the collective sentiment of social media mentions. If flights were running ahead of schedule and customer sentiment was high, the brand's social media headers transitioned into soft, undulating gradients of sky blue and white, moving with a fluid, liquid-like motion. If there were significant delays due to a blizzard in the Midwest, the visual identity shifted into a more structured, informative, and grounded aesthetic with high-visibility oranges and deep charcoals. This adaptive visual language allowed the airline to communicate their status non-verbally, building a level of transparency and trust that traditional PR campaigns could never achieve. The step-by-step implementation of a fluid identity requires a move away from traditional design software and into the world of creative coding. Step 1 is the definition of the brand DNA. You must decide which elements remain constant, perhaps the typeface or a specific geometric proportion, and which elements are variable. Step 2 is the data mapping. You identify the external triggers that will influence the design. This could be anything from the current price of a stock to the volume of a specific hashtag on social media. Step 3 is the development of the generative engine. Using tools like Processing P5.js or specialized AI-integrated design platforms available in 2026, you create a system where the data inputs drive the visual outputs. For example, a high volume of positive comments might increase the roundness and glow of your brand's primary shapes, while a surge in technical support requests might trigger a shift toward more linear, instructional, and sharp-edged graphics. This leads us into the second half of the fluid identity trend, the rise of the sentient brand avatar. In the US market, we are seeing a massive shift away from anonymous corporate logos and toward digital entities that possess a personality, a voice, and a physical presence in the digital space. Imagine if Emily, a social media manager in Chicago, isn't just posting photos of a new skincare line. Instead, she is managing an AI-driven brand avatar named Soul. Soul is a translucent, iridescent entity that lives in the brand's social media stories. Soul's appearance changes based on the products being discussed, but more importantly, Soul reacts to the audience in real time. If the comments section is full of questions, Soul's form becomes more structured and focused, emitting a soft light that guides the viewer's eye to key information. If the community is celebrating a milestone, Soul becomes more expansive, colorful, and energetic. The psychological impact of the brand avatar is rooted in our evolution. In the next part of this masterclass, we are going to dive into the most controversial trend of 2026, the bioresponsive aesthetic. We will look at how brands are using front-facing camera data and wearable tech integration to design graphics that literally change based on your heart rate or your pupil dilation. We will also explore the rise of deep sync advertising, where the movement of the design is timed to match the viewer's breathing pattern to induce a state of maximum suggestibility. Are you ready to see how design is moving from your screen into your nervous system? Because the next level of this masterclass is where the science of design meets the science of the human body. The bioresponsive aesthetic is the ultimate realization of the user-centric design philosophy that has been evolving for decades. In 2026, we are no longer designing for a demographic, we are designing for a nervous system. This trend is driven by the total integration of biometric sensors into our daily lives. Whether it is a smartwatch, a smart ring, or the advanced pupil tracking cameras found in the latest smartphones and mixed reality glasses, the digital environment now has a real-time window into the physiological state of the viewer. Imagine if Liam, a high-stakes account executive in Manhattan, is browsing his social feed during a particularly stressful morning commute. As he scrolls, the algorithm detects through his wearable device that his heart rate is elevated and his breathing is shallow. Instead of serving him the aggressive, high-energy advertisements that usually populate his feed, the design system triggers a bioresponsive override. This override switches the visual assets to what we call the parasympathetic palette. The sharp, jagged edges of the typography soften into rounded, fluid forms. The background transitions from a static white to a deep, oceanic blue that subtly shifts in brightness. Most importantly, the animation of the graphic begins to pulse at a rate of exactly 5.5 seconds per cycle. This is not a random number. In 2026, designers are using what is known as resonant frequency breathing patterns to influence the viewer's physical state. As Liam looks at the graphic, his brain subconsciously begins to synchronize his breathing with the visual pulse of the ad. This is the deep sync phenomenon. The potential outcome is a state of physiological calm that Liam now associates with the brand. This is no longer just graphic design. It is biological engineering via visual stimuli. Historical trends show that earlier attempts at this, such as basic dark mode toggles or blue light filters, were the first steps toward this reality. However, the 2026 iteration is far more sophisticated because it is dynamic and bidirectional. Case studies from the US wellness industry highlight a brand called Aeon that implemented bioresponsive social media templates. When their data showed a user was in a high arousal state, the ads focused on calming, minimalist aesthetics. When the user was in a low-energy state, such as late at night or during a mid-afternoon slump, the ad switched to a dopamine spike layout, using high-frequency color flashes and kinetic typography to re-engage the brain. Aeon saw a 50% increase in brand affinity scores because their content felt like it was providing exactly what the user needed in that specific moment. To implement the bioresponsive aesthetic step by step, a designer must first move away from static image exports. The workflow in 2026 involves creating what we call state-aware components. Step 1 is the identification of your biometric triggers. You decide which physiological metrics will drive your design. Is it heart rate, skin conductance, or gaze duration? Step 2 is the creation of your variable asset library. You do not just design one version of a post, you design a spectrum. This is where the concept of the variable font becomes crucial. In 2026, Fonts are no longer just bold or italic, they are parametric. You can link the weight of the font to the user's heart rate. As the heart beats faster, the font becomes heavier and more intense. As the heart slows, the font thins out, creating a visual breathing effect. Step 3 involves the use of real-time rendering engines like 3.js or specialized social media AR frameworks. Instead of uploading a video file, you are uploading a piece of code that renders the graphic on the user's device. This code listens to the device's health API. For example, you might set a conditional statement in your CSS. If heart rate is greater than 120, set the background animation speed to 2x and change the hue rotate to a warmer spectrum. If the heart rate is below 70, set the animation to a slow drift and move the color palette toward cool violets. This level of customization ensures that the graphic is never out of sync with the user's biological reality. The depth of this trend also encompasses the concept of pupil-centric layouts. Advanced eye tracking in 2026 devices allows designers to know exactly which pixel the user is looking at in real time. This allows for a technique called foveated design. To save processing power and create a sense of focus, the design renders in high detail only where the user is looking. The rest of the graphic remains in a soft, artistic blur. But the real innovation is in the interaction. Imagine a graphic where the text only reveals itself when you look directly at it, or where a liquid chrome element follows your gaze around the screen like a digital pet. This creates a powerful sense of agency and intimacy. The user feels as though the design is responding to their very thoughts. Data from US-based neuromarketing firms in 2026 suggests that bioresponsive graphics have a 400% higher stickiness than static or standard motion content. This is because they engage the viewer on a primal level. When a design syncs with your heartbeat, it stops being external information and starts being an extension of yourself. This leads to what researchers call the mirror effect, where the user perceives the brand's personality as being identical to their own. In the hyper-competitive American market, this is the ultimate competitive advantage. You are not just fighting for attention, you are fighting for biological integration. However, we must also address the technical challenges of the deep sync approach. Syncing a visual pulse to a human heartbeat requires ultra-low latency. If the pulse is off by even a fraction of a second, it can create a sense of visual nausea or cognitive dissonance. This is why 2026 designers are obsessed with frame rate stability and edge computing. The processing of the biometric data must happen on the device itself, not in the cloud, to ensure the reaction is instantaneous. We are also seeing a new role in design agencies: the biodata analyst, whose job is to ensure that the visual triggers being used are scientifically sound and do not cause adverse reactions in the viewer. Another fascinating aspect of this trend is the rise of the circadian graphic. This is a design that follows the natural light and hormonal cycles of the human body. In the morning, the graphics use high-energy blue light and sharp, crisp layouts to help wake the user up. As evening approaches, the graphics automatically transition into warm, amber tones with low-contrast layouts that do not interfere with melatonin production. This health-first design philosophy is becoming a major selling point for premium brands in the US. It positions the brand as a responsible partner in the user's well-being, rather than just another source of digital noise. Consider the implications for the future of storytelling. In a bioresponsive world, the story can change based on how you feel. If a user is watching a brand documentary and their heart rate spikes during a specific scene, the subsequent graphics and layouts can lean into that excitement, providing more high-octane visual information. If the user appears bored or distracted, detected through gaze drift or pupil dilation, the design can simplify itself, stripping away the clutter to focus on a single, powerful message. This is the birth of the sentient content era, where the graphic design is as much a listener as it is a speaker. But as we master the internal state of the viewer, we must also look outward. While the bioresponsive aesthetic focuses on the human body, there is another trend that focuses on the human environment. We are entering the world of world-aware graphics, where the design doesn't just know how you feel. It knows exactly where you are standing and what the room around you looks like. This is the integration of spatial computing and social media design at a level we have never seen before. In the next part, we are going to explore the fifth and final trend of this masterclass: spatial contextual mapping. We will look at how brands are using LiDAR data and real-time environmental scanning to make their graphics interact with the physical furniture in your room. We will break down the step-by-step process of creating occlusion-aware assets that can hide behind your real-world coffee table or cast shadows onto your actual walls. Are you ready to see how the line between your digital feed and your physical home is about to vanish forever? This is the ultimate merger of the two worlds, and the brands that master it will be the ones that literally inhabit the lives of their customers. The final frontier of this masterclass is the shift from visual content to volumetric experiences, a trend we define as spatial contextual mapping. In 2026, the screen is no longer a flat surface that displays images. It has become a transparent lens that interprets the physical world. While we previously touched on sensory layouts and the movement of the phone, spatial contextual mapping is the deep integration of your digital assets into the user's actual physical environment. Imagine if Chloe, a graphic designer in a sun-drenched loft in Seattle, is scrolling through a social media feed for a high-end interior design brand. In the past, she would have seen a beautiful photograph of a mid-century modern chair. In 2026, the brand's post uses world-aware logic. As Chloe pauses on the post, the brand's graphic doesn't just sit in a square box. Using the LiDAR sensors and the advanced spatial computing processors in her smartphone, the chair literally jumps out of the feed and anchors itself to her actual floor. The potential outcome of this trend is the complete destruction of the friction between seeing and owning. Historical trends from 2024 and 2025 showed that augmented reality was often a gimmick, a separate app or a clunky filter. But in 2026, this technology is baked into the very fabric of the graphic design itself. This is what we call occlusion-aware design. If Chloe's physical coffee table is in the way, the digital chair graphic correctly hides behind it. The lighting on the digital fabric shifts in real time to match the actual light coming through her Seattle windows. This level of environmental integration creates a psychological phenomenon known as the endowment effect. When an object appears to exist in your physical space, your brain begins to treat it as something you already possess. Case studies from major U.S. retailers show that spatial contextual graphics have led to a 70% decrease in product returns because consumers have already visually and spatially validated the item within their own homes before making a purchase. To implement spatial contextual mapping step by step, you must move beyond the role of a traditional graphic designer and into the role of a spatial architect. Step 1 is the creation of a digital twin. In 2026, you are not just designing a 2D representation, you are creating a high-fidelity volumetric asset. This asset must include physically based rendering materials that react to light, shadow, and texture exactly like their real-world counterparts. Step 2 is the environmental anchor. You must program your graphic with specific metadata that allows it to identify surfaces, floors, walls, and tables, using the user's camera feed. This is achieved through SLAM technology, or simultaneous localization and mapping. When the user's phone identifies a horizontal plane, your graphic snaps to it with a subtle haptic thump, giving the digital object a sense of physical weight. Step 3 is the implementation of real-time ray tracing. For a graphic to truly feel like it belongs in a room in 2026, it must reflect the room's actual colors. If Chloe is wearing a bright red sweater while holding her phone, the chrome legs of the digital chair should show a faint red reflection of her. This is the difference between a floating sticker and a spatial reality. Step 4 is the interactive trigger. These graphics are not static, they are responsive. If Chloe taps the chair on her screen, it might change color or provide a spatial audio description that sounds like it is coming from the chair's actual location in her room. This is the ultimate form of context-aware marketing. Let us look at a case study of a major American athletic brand that utilized spatial contextual mapping for a limited sneaker drop in 2026. Instead of a standard web link, they released a spatial graphic. To buy the shoes, users had to place a digital shoe box in their own environment. When the box was opened, a holographic animation of the shoe's design process played out on the user's actual desk, ending with the shoe itself floating in front of them. The data from this campaign was staggering. Not only did it achieve a 95% click-through rate, but the average time on post was over 4 minutes. In a world where we fight for 1.7 seconds of attention, 4 minutes is an eternity. This case study proves that when you give the user a reason to explore their own space through your brand, the engagement metrics skyrocket. Furthermore, we must discuss the rise of geospatial design. This is where your social media graphics are anchored to specific physical locations in the United States. Imagine a creator named Marcus in Brooklyn. When he walks past a specific mural in Williamsburg, his phone receives a notification that a digital graphic is anchored to that wall. He looks through his device, and the mural comes to life with liquid chrome typography and bioresponsive animations that react to the local traffic noise. This is the merging of out-of-home advertising with social media design. Brands are now hiring designers to create digital graffiti that can only be seen in certain cities or neighborhoods, creating a sense of localized exclusivity. The depth of this trend also covers the concept of shared spatial reality. In 2026, social media platforms are allowing multiple users to see the same spatial graphic in the same room. If Chloe and Marcus are in the same apartment, they can both look at the same digital chair from different angles at the same time. This turns a solo scrolling experience into a social physical event. This is where the power of the viral moment is shifting. It's no longer just about a video that everyone watches. It's about a spatial experience that everyone participates in. To master this as a professional, you must understand the infrastructure of USDZ and GLB files, which have become the MP4S of 2026. These file formats allow your designs to carry all the necessary physics and lighting data across different platforms and devices. You are also seeing the integration of AI into this process. Designers are now using generative tools to hallucinate the missing parts of a room scan, ensuring that the occlusion and lighting of their graphics remain perfect, even if the user has a messy or poorly lit environment. This is the generative patching technique that is becoming a standard in the industry. As we look at the potential outcomes of spatial contextual mapping, we see a world where the physical and digital are indistinguishable. Your social media feed is no longer something you look at. It is something you live inside of. This is the culmination of everything we have discussed in this masterclass. The tactile textures, the chaotic typography, the liquid chrome, and the bioresponsive pulses all find their ultimate home in the spatial world. You are no longer designing for a screen, you are designing for the human experience of reality itself. But there is one final piece to this puzzle. Throughout this masterclass, we have explored these 5 massive trends, but there is a hidden force that is actually controlling them all. There is an invisible layer of artificial intelligence that isn't just generating the images, but is actually orchestrating the entire visual narrative in real time for every single user. It is the ghost trend that no one is talking about yet, but it is the secret to why some brands are becoming global powerhouses while others are vanishing. In the final part of this masterclass, we are going to do a deep dive wrap-up. We will reveal the invisible AI orchestration layer, and how it ties all 5 trends together into a single unstoppable marketing machine. We will also provide a step-by-step roadmap for how you can transition your brand from the 2D world of the past to the multidimensional world of 2026. This is the summary that turns knowledge into power. Are you ready to see the full picture? Because the final part is where we connect all the dots and give you the blueprint for total digital dominance in the US market. The invisible force that is currently synchronizing these trends into a unified weapon of mass attention is what we call hyper-personalized visual assembly. In the legacy era of social media, a brand would create a single piece of content and hope it resonated with a broad demographic. In 2026, that approach is a relic of the past. The ghost trend isn't a visual style, it is an algorithmic conductor. Imagine if Ryan, a high-performance athlete in Denver, and his sister Maya, a corporate attorney in Boston, both follow the same luxury automotive brand. When Ryan scrolls past a post at 6 a.m., the AI orchestration layer identifies his high arousal state and serves him a graphic using the strategic lo-fi and chaotic typography trends. It feels raw, intense, and ready for his morning workout. Simultaneously, when Maya views the same brand's profile from her office, the system serves her a liquid chrome, sensory spatial layout that emphasizes calm, precision, and high-tech luxury. This is the convergence of everything we have discussed. The 5 trends are no longer separate options. They are variables in a real-time generative equation. The AI orchestration layer pulls from your brand's asset library, the grainy textures of the analog hybrid, the vibrating colors of the polarized palette, and the physics-based logic of neuromotion, and assembles them into a custom visual experience for every single user in the United States. Historical trends indicate that this shift from static to generative content has resulted in the highest levels of digital engagement ever recorded in the US market. The potential outcome is a brand that feels like a personal friend to millions of people simultaneously, because it is visually speaking their specific language at that exact moment in time. To achieve total digital dominance in 2026, you must follow a strict roadmap that transitions your design philosophy from the 2D past to this volumetric, sentient future. Step 1 of this blueprint is the total audit of brand vitality. You must ruthlessly eliminate any remains of the flat, corporate minimalism that defined the 2010s. If your logo is static, if your colors are muted pastels, And if your typography is safe, you are invisible. You must replace these with high contrast, Vantablack-based palettes and variable, chaotic fonts that suggest life and movement. This is the foundation. You are shifting from a brand that is seen to a brand that is felt. Step 2 is the construction of the volumetric asset library. You can no longer rely on JPGs or MP4s. Your brand must be built in 3D from the ground up. This involves creating high-fidelity USDZ and GLB files for every product and brand element. You must ensure these assets are occlusion-aware, meaning they are ready to step out of the screen and into the user's living room. Case studies of successful American startups in 2026 show that brands that invested in spatial assets early saw a significant increase in their community's perceived value of the product. When a user can physically walk around a digital representation of your product in their own space, the barrier to purchase virtually disappears. Step 3 is the implementation of neurodynamics. This is where you move beyond simple animation and into the realm of physics-based interaction. Every element of your social media presence must have mass, friction, and elasticity. You must work with motion designers who understand easing curves as a psychological tool. If a user swipes a carousel, the transition should feel like moving a heavy piece of glass, not a digital slide. This tactile feedback creates the dopamine loops that keep users engaged with your content. You are training the user's brain to find your brand's digital movements satisfying on a biological level. Step 4 is the integration of the bioresponsive layer. This is the most sensitive but powerful part of the roadmap. You must begin utilizing the health and biometric APIs available on modern American smartphones to create deep sync experiences. This means your graphics should be programmed to react to the environment and the physiological state of the viewer. If it is raining in New York, your liquid chrome elements should show digital raindrops. If the user's heart rate is high, your typography should breathe at a calming pace. By syncing your brand's visual output with the user's internal and external reality, you are achieving a level of intimacy that was once impossible. Step 5 is the deployment of the sentient brand avatar. Your logo is no longer a mark. It is a member of the community. You must develop a generative identity that can speak, react, and evolve. This avatar serves as the face of your AI orchestration. It is the entity that navigates the spatial world with the user, appearing in their AR glasses to provide information, or simply to exist within their physical environment. This is the ultimate form of brand loyalty. In the US market of 2026, people don't follow companies, they follow entities that they can interact with. Consider the potential outcomes for a creator like Olivia in Los Angeles. She runs a boutique wellness brand. By following this roadmap, she moves from posting static photos of her products to creating a living ecosystem. When her followers wake up, her brand avatar appears in a soft, lo-fi morning aesthetic to guide them through a breathing exercise that is visually synced to their heart rate. In the afternoon, her social feed transforms into a liquid chrome gallery of her products that users can place on their own yoga mats to see the scale and texture. By the evening, the identity shifts into a dark, Vantablack-themed educational masterclass that uses chaotic typography to highlight key wellness data. Olivia is no longer competing for a spot in the algorithm. She has become a permanent fixture in her audience's physical and mental space. This is the blueprint for the 2026 design apocalypse. The old rules have been burned, and a new hyper-intense and deeply human visual language has risen from the ashes. You have the tools, the trends, and the psychological insights to not just survive this shift, but to lead it. You understand that design is no longer about aesthetics. It is about biology, physics, and world building. The American digital landscape is waiting for brands that are brave enough to break the grid, embrace the chaos, and step into the third dimension. As we close this deep dive masterclass, remember that the speed of change in 2026 is exponential. The trends we have discussed today, from strategic lo-fi to spatial contextual mapping, are the foundation of a new era of human-computer interaction. The question is no longer whether you will adapt, but how quickly you can implement these shifts before the window of opportunity closes. You are now equipped with the knowledge of the top 1% of designers and marketers in the United States. Use it to build something that doesn't just scroll by, but something that leaves a permanent mark on the digital and physical world. The journey doesn't end here. The technical execution of these trends requires a mastery of the latest software and AI tools. If you are ready to move from the theory to the practice, we have prepared a technical deep dive into the specific AI prompting and 3D modeling workflows used to create these exact effects. Would you like me to break down the step-by-step software configurations for creating bioresponsive liquid Chrome assets in the next session?